Please introduce yourself.
My name's Dave Fuller. I'm the hydrogeologist or geologist for the Port Gamble-Sklallam Indian Tribe, and I've been there for 14 years doing water resources and geology. And prior to that, I spent almost 10 years here at the Suquamish Tribe doing geology and water resources.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and you can answer them with as many sentences or as few as you'd like. First one is, how long did it take you to get to where you are?
There are several levels to that. The first is it took 4 years to get an undergraduate geology degree and an additional 2 years to get a master's degree in geology. But I'm a little bit of an anomaly in Indian Territory because we were living in California where I worked at the California Geological Survey, and then I worked in Minnesota when my wife got a better job there. So I have background in earthquakes, minerals, property evaluations, mineral evaluations, and the kinds of things that many places would have to hire 2 or 3 or 4 people to do. So the Suquamish Tribe had an opening with a new grant that they got back in 1991 to build a geology and basically water resources program, and I stepped into that, and that is a job that is now held by John O'Leary with the tribe. So part of my job working for this tribe and for the tribe that I'm currently working for is to preserve the water resources and natural resources of the tribe and mentor and encourage tribal members to take the job that I have.
Interesting. So what tools do you use out in the field or on just a daily basis?
A lot of the field work we've actually passed on, and I've helped train young tribal members to do a lot of the water quality and sampling work. A lot of what I do at the moment is writing some of the grants. I do a lot of computer mapping of the water resources and the issues. And I brought in many years ago some commercial software packages that actually let me store the geology in 3 dimensions and then be able to map aquifers and water supplies and all of that, so that it's not just looking at what's immediately on the surface of the ground, but understanding how the groundwater and the surface water are connected.
What college did you go to?
I went undergraduate to California State University in Sacramento, and then I did graduate work up at Idaho State University in Idaho, partly because one of my undergraduate professors had worked and taught up in that area, and I knew that there were mining companies and interests in that area that would actually help support students during the summer and doing their master's thesis work.
Okay, what was your inspiration to get into this job?
My wife once asked me that question, and I immediately said by default, which she thought was a deliberate pun related to earthquake faulting. But it was really, I started out thinking I wanted to go into chemistry, and as a kid I taught myself a lot of astronomy. And then when I was in college, I took biology and a whole bunch of sciences. And geology literally was an opportunity to use any and all of those on a regular basis. So there's a little bit of earth science that you can apply into geology. There's a fair amount of math and physics and chemistry and dealing with fossils and landslides and any number of things. So you can make a career in geology out of just about anything that you're really interested in.
Cool. Speaking of family, has any other family member gotten into this job?
Not initially. It turns out that after I had my degrees and started working with tribes in different places, I'm sort of the family historian. I inherited a bunch of family history documents, and all of a sudden genealogy became very popular and everybody found out that I had the material. So I developed an Ancestry.com webpage for the family so I could share the stuff more easily. And in the process of that, discovered that on one side of the family I come from Scottish coal miners, and on the other side of the family I come from Welsh coal miners. So there's a little bit of geology in the blood, if you will. And then my daughter took more of the biology end of things, so she's an environmental scientist down in California working on preservation and restoration of the Sacramento River Delta and the area going into San Francisco Bay. So there's a little bit of a family connection that way.
What is your best and or worst memory of this job?
I don't know that I have any really bad memories of this job. It does get a little tiring as you get older in the job, where you spend more time writing the grants and doing some of the administrative stuff, where when you're younger and have the opportunity and you aren't paid as much, you actually get to go out in the field and do the sampling. So we set up the monitoring stations for the tribe here out in the Keokuk wetlands and out in Dokegwats and Claybell Creek and Cowling Creek and all those for documenting the water and preserving the integrity of the environment for the tribe. So a lot of people go into geology because they want to be out in the field all the time, and the reality is, if you're lucky, you can spend 10 to 20 or 30% of your time, but there's a fair amount of the work that requires you to process the data that you collect and think about what it means and how it fits. And a basic concept of geology was developed in the 1890s by a guy named T.C. Chamberlain, and it's called multiple working hypotheses. So multiple working hypotheses is sort of like the Sherlock Holmes, that if you're trying to solve a mystery and you think of all the possible things that could be connected with it and you get rid of all of the ones that don't make any sense, the last one that does, no matter how illogical it seems, is the answer. So in geology, you're supposed to be looking at things basically from a true scientific standpoint of what are the possible things that could have gotten us to this spot or gotten the Earth to this spot or the conditions to this spot, and solving the mystery and coming up with the best reasonable explanation of how something like the Oso landslide could have happened and people didn't pay attention, or what can you do based on the existing knowledge of some earthquakes that have taken place in a particular area to better design buildings so that they don't fall down. Or if there are a bunch of water wells in a given area and you can map the information to see where the water is below the surface and which way it flows, which is actually pretty easy to do, you can predict where to put in water wells, like I did for the Suquamish Tribes Casino and for the Hard Rock sand and gravel and concrete operation on the res, or the RV park. You can actually predict, or reasonably predict, how deeply somebody has to drill a well and about how much water they can get and how sustainable it is. So that's part of the fun.
Okay. What have you ever had any injuries, and what was the worst one like you ever?
I've been very fortunate. I haven't had any injuries, but back when I worked for the California Geological Survey, they had actually had somebody seriously injured and somebody killed in a trench operation along a fault. And it wasn't that the fault moved, it's just that the trench wasn't properly shored to keep it from falling in. So we actually had to go through formal training before we were able to go anywhere near anything like that. So most reputable organizations, government agencies, and private consulting firms stress very firmly the need for safety and watching out for your own interests. And if you don't feel that it's safe to do, you shouldn't be doing it.
So, how much traveling do you do?
In the old days, most of the traveling was on the reservation, getting to know the reservations, and there's the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission that has a coordinated water quality group, and we used to do at least once a month. I'm at the point in my career where I've been around long enough that people think I know something. So all of a sudden I've been appointed over the last several years to 4 or 5 different federal advisory committees on tribal water resources and climate change and information systems. So most of the travel that I've been doing the last 6 or 7 years has all been paid for by other federal groups as opposed to my tribal grants. And so I've done like 40 or 50,000 miles of flying just related to the job the last 5 or 6 years. So it sort of depends on how much you're willing to participate, and if you're a tribal technical person, and particularly if you're a tribal member and a technical person, you can't really afford to tell federal agencies or other groups that you don't have time to participate, because the political reality is the minute you tell somebody that you don't have time to participate in a county planning process or a state process or a federal process, some of them will check a little box that say Indians aren't interested, so don't bother contacting them. So many of currently I think I'm on 4 federal advisory committees, and I'm an alternate to a 5th one. And I see myself as a placeholder, as a white person working for Indian tribes, so that the tribes still have an open door for somebody to come or for me to try and help find somebody else who's a tribal technical person to step into that spot.
So for activities, do you get like free time or like time off for injuries, or if like a family member's hurt, do you get time off for that?
Yes, at the Port Gamble Squalam tribe, similar to Suquamish, if you're a staff person, after so many years you get so many additional hours of annual leave. There's regular sick leave. And I'm really fortunate because my wife has always had, as a professor at the University of Washington, a very secure job. And a lot of her work has been international lately with public health and helping ministries of health and countries develop medical records and disease tracking stuff. So we spend our time in our accumulated frequent flyer miles and time seeing parts of the world. So we take advantage of the opportunities that we've been able to get through those jobs, and then a lot of the photographs and things that I take that are geology related, I now incorporate back into my part-time teaching for Northwest Indian College for the geology portion of the environmental science degrees that we have at the branch campus up on the Port Gamble Reservation. So I've had several of the Suquamish tribal members who are working on their degrees in my classes.
So for like, let's say you just started, like you're getting, do you usually have to take a test so they know what you know, so like they know where to put you?
There's several levels to that also. For an entry-level job, it was basically filling out experience based on what they were looking for. And then there was an interview with one tribal council person and 2 tribal staff, asking questions just to see how well you could interact with people, because when I started working at Suquamish, it was the early years of building the programs, and there were some county officials who tried to convince people that the tribes didn't exist anymore, that the reservations didn't exist, that they were a historical footnote. And there were people who would try and bait tribal council or tribal staff to say something that they could use to suggest that either the tribes didn't know what they were doing or didn't have the appropriate technical background or whatever. From a professional standpoint, the state of Washington, where we are right now, and the state of California and a number of states have licensing programs for geologists and hydrogeologists and engineering geologists, which set a particular competency level. So I'm licensed and have been since 1981 in California. You have to have so much education and then actually take 8 hours worth of exam with no notes, no calculators, or anything else. And the state of Washington has something similar, but I'm licensed as a geologist and a hydrogeologist up here. And then there's an American American Institute of Professional Geologists that, based on your education and experience, have professionals review your background, and I'm nationally certified with them also. So it's jumping through an extra hoop, but it's something that isn't necessarily required for the job, but it's beneficial, and it gets rid of the 20 questions when you're meeting new people that say, well, if you're going to be on this committee or if you're going to be participating here, how do we know that what you're saying is technically sound? And having the licenses and the credentials just gets rid of all of those questions. And because there's a code of ethics and professional standards that are expected out of people that have those licenses. So if you're going to maintain your licenses, you take continuing education classes, and you put forward only accurate and repeatable and appropriate interpretations and information.
So, documents, like, what different things do you have to document, like the different landscapes, like how many minerals and rocks you find in it?
A lot of what I've worked on through the years, and it's actually been beneficial and helped build good relationships with the state of Washington, particularly with the Department of Ecology, who look at water rights and water quality, is every time a well or a test hole is put in the ground, there's a requirement by the state that a copy from the well driller has to be submitted to the state. And through the years, when they were working on evaluating the impacts from pumping the water out of a well and whether it affected a salmon stream or could affect somebody else's well, they were just having to look at pieces of paper back and forth. And I actually got tired of having to hand draw everything, so I went out and found a software package where you can just simply, I spent several months building the data dictionary, but you can simply store the well information, which is a record of what they drilled through, what kind of rock and sediment, and if there were peat deposits or anything else, and you end up with a diagram that you can print out that shows what the well looks like and where they found water and where they didn't find water. And then the software was designed so that when you turn on a particular function, it shows where all of those holes are located and the elevation at which each of the holes is. And you can simply connect the dots and say, I want to see what the ground looks like if I took a knife and sliced it from this point to this point through these wells. And it pops up the geology in color at the individual wells, and then you can interactively connect the similar material. So you can actually map where the aquifers, the porous materials that have water for wells are, and where the clay layers that protect them are. And there's just a ton of things you can do, but you can also then link that to GIS, the computer mapping, to show how far and where and the likelihood of that well impacting a stream or a wetlands. So that's the kind of documentation I've pretty much done through the years, other than reviewing documents to explain why there's a problem with a project or how the state should allow somebody to have a water right, but there should be conditions on when that water, or how much water is pumped at a given time. And the Suquamish tribe and the Port Gamble tribe, as an example, based on that work, are part of an advisory committee in the county, up in the Kingston area and over in the Seebeck area, on allowing the Kitsap County Public Utility District to pump water to supply Indians and non-Indians, but to carefully monitor it and incrementally increase the water rights as it is safe to do, based on actual year-round monitoring of the streams and the wells and the water quality.
Okay, so how many contracts do you usually get on a yearly basis?
It used to be that we had to write 2 or 3 or 4 different grant proposals to, like, the Environmental Protection Agency or the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we've been able collectively to work with those agencies. So fundamentally, I'm writing one grant proposal, but it has 2 or 3 federal programs mixed into it. So it's called they call it a PPG, a Performance Partnership Grant, which means that we can take money for clean water and for tribal environmental programs and similar ones, and put them together, and we say, this is what we're going to do during the course of the year, this is what we're going to be able to deliver by the end of the year or the end of 2 years. And there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of how we still within that work can accomplish other emergency things that show up, or if we have to review a project, or if there was a flood or a dam broke and started washing out fishery streams.
Well, again, thank you for coming in. I have gone through all my questions, so please, if you would state your name for last time, and then just...
My name's Dave Fuller, and I currently work for the Port Gamble S'Klallam tribe, and I used to work for the Suquamish tribe. And part of what I was told in 1991 was, as a white guy working for an Indian tribe, part of my responsibility was to try and mentor tribal folks into the job that I have, and in the meantime to protect the reservation and the environment for future generations. So
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you for coming in.